I acquired the skill of reading people when I was a bouncer under quite stressful conditions because you're trying to work out whether someone's got a knife, whether they're just drunk or they're going to get violent. When you've been at Bristol City's annual, match against Cardiff, where it could all turn into a riot at any minute, suddenly boardrooms seem a lot less high pressure than they used to.
Welcome to The Future is Human. I'm Naomi Trickey, and in this podcast, I talk with leaders from tech and hospitality businesses about how both they and their people are navigating the edge between humans and technology in an increasingly automated environment. We break out of the mold of a standard business conversation to hear more informal perspectives and reflections, to understand what people are really feeling about the future of work. Welcome to The Future is Human. Today we are joined by Meri Williams, who is a seasoned Chief Technology Officer, formerly at Pleo, Monzo, Moo, all sorts of places, and is a really dynamic and very vocal leader, which I always appreciate, You've not only scaled tech organizations across a lot of different industries, actually, so fintech, medtech, e-commerce, but also one of the things I love most about your career trajectory and the work you do is you've really championed the development of people alongside the development of products in very high pressure environments. I know you're very uncompromising about the kind of both of those things. And you are the chair of the Lead Developer Conference, and so very widely known in the industry. And you served as an advisor to several high impact tech companies. So Meri brings a wealth of experience in leading teams, transforming processes, and really, I think, balancing the need for innovation with actually really maintaining a human-centered workplace, which is why we invited you to be our guest. So I'm thrilled to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time.
Thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I'm just gonna kick off with questions. I've just said, you worked in a wide range of industries, and you've run conferences, you've helped run disruptor banks. I happen to know that you've worked on South Africa's first satellite, and as a bouncer. So I just love that kind of hustle. That's brilliant. I'd love to know, first off, what's a really key skill you've actually developed to help manage people and workplace cultures, and how did you acquire that skill?
So I think I acquired the skill of reading people when I was a bouncer, under quite stressful conditions because you're trying to work out whether someone's got a knife, whether they're just drunk or they're going to get violent, whether they're following other people into the bathroom. There's all sorts of stuff that can go wrong in a very drunken and drugged kind of environment, which is what a lot of the environments that require bouncers are like. And I found out a few years ago that I'm autistic and ADHD, so I'm neurodivergent as well. And so I think I wasn't very good at reading people before I had that job. But I have a bit of a history of taking the hardest approach to getting good at something. I had a pretty severe stammer as a kid and then joined the debate team as the way of fixing it. So I think becoming a bouncer was like a, hardest mode version of becoming good at reading people.
Yeah, if you can do that, then you can do it in any context. Like a boardroom suddenly becomes very, very manageable, right?
Yeah, when you've been at Bristol City's Cardiff annual, match against Cardiff, where it could all turn into a riot at any minute, suddenly boardrooms seem a lot less high pressure than they used to. Yeah.
Board members that sit alongside Meri, beware. Already we're getting a flavour. You've had a really unique set of opportunities to kind of shape the culture and the leadership at several really very successful companies. And if you had to point to one moment that shaped your leadership style, what would that be?
So it's probably less a moment and more a person. So I worked for a woman called Michelle Hughes early in my career at Procter & Gamble. She was a director already when I was like an intern. And she was who showed me that you could be yourself and be successful. And she was we were quite similar in some ways. She was sort of working class Glaswegian, hadn't ever imagined she would get to, director in a company as big as P&G. She went on to be a senior vice president. She was there for sort of 33 years and incredibly successful. But she showed me that you could be human and be a great leader. She was incredibly transparent. She was very much herself and didn't, she would she would give you the company line, and then she would give you her real opinion about it. And I think that was incredibly inspiring, and especially now I know I'm autistic, I'm like, the sense of justice and the directness there was really valuable. But she was also somebody who took time to give me a translation of some difficult feedback I got early in my career. So I got a lot of feedback early in my career, which to me just sounded like, could you be less butch and less South African, please? Because it was all about how direct I was. And I was like, I don't really know how to stop being those things. I'm not very good at stopping being, who I am culturally or gender presentation wise. And she was the one who kind of went, no. What they're trying to say is, it feels like you're jumping to a solution and trying to make people feel stupid. And so if that's not your intent, then there's something to fix here. And it's not that you are from a particular culture or that you present a certain way. It's how you're making people feel. And that was a real unlock for me, that it was somebody just taking the time to make the feedback make sense to me and to make it something about my behavior rather than about who I was. And I could do something about that behavior and that, perceived intent that people thought I was, trying to one up them was absolutely not my intention. And so realizing that was how it was being taken was made it much easier to fix the challenges I was having. And I think I wouldn't have survived at P&G without her. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, not at all. I interrupted you. No, I think it's this will be a terribly polite podcast as well, I'm sure. I think I'm really interested in that point about identity, actually, that there is this distinction between identity and behavior that this one really clearly helped you to navigate. And it's how do you do that and retain that level of authenticity in a world where actually technology can both enable, but also sometimes gets in our way? Have you experienced that kind of challenge?
I remember one of my very early managers, I was working very closely with some engineers in India early in my career at P&G, and they'd outsourced all the coding to offshore. And so I was in a sort of product manager type role is what we would call it today, but it was not known as that at the time. And I let my boss know that I wasn't, I thought we needed to be go a little easier on the deadlines for the next couple of weeks because the lead engineer was getting married. And he went, "How on earth do you know that?" And I went, "Because I chat to him." And I was adept at forming relationships over just messaging and, the occasional conference call. And this was way before video was a thing. It was, all spider phones and "can you hear me?" and "I'm sorry, who joined?" and all of the, those sort of classic tropes from the days of just pure conference calling. And I just remember thinking that actually the experience I'd had as a teenager, where I found a lot of community online, and there wasn't a lot of gay culture available in apartheid South Africa. And so weirdly, the only thing available to me was Xena, Warrior Princess. And then I found some forums online in the sort of early internet in the 90s. And unsurprisingly, that's where a whole load of lesbians were, was on Xena forums on the internet. So had, some of my oldest friends I didn't meet for the first 5 years I knew them. I talked with them online, talked to them over the phone, and then eventually got to go to the US and meet them at a Xena convention, which was hilarious. The show was still on, 6,000 people, 5,950 women and 50 men, thinking my odds are pretty great this weekend, and realizing how wrong they...
Sorry, mate.
But
Read
I
that
think
wrong.
to be a male fan of Xena requires a certain level of unawareness.
Yeah, brilliant.
that maybe everybody around you is not heterosexual is not something that occurs to the kind of people who sort of blithely go along to that kind of conference.
I love that. And so that's so interesting, because I had a similar experience actually during COVID, when everyone suddenly went online and people started talking about how difficult it now was to build relationships. And I'm like, I don't know. No, I'm doing it with technology, and and despite technology, both of those things, rather than being prevented from doing it. And I think maybe there is something about who we are as people, more generally outside of this realm, that just it doesn't feel any harder to me anyway. And whether that's because of experience like the one you've had, or just because of who you are as a person, I think it's really great to acknowledge it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, certainly, I've thought about it a lot, and I think some of it is the neurodivergence because I think I'm a lot more cerebral and analytical about how people think and feel. I'm sort of running Monte Carlo simulations in my head the whole time of like, does this face could mean this, or this? What cues have I got? What are the possibilities? What are the probabilities? Kind of like, just my psychiatrist at one point said to me, that must be very tiring. I was like, that's not how everybody does it. And but yeah, I think I don't find it wildly different when online. I can still see someone's face, and I think I maybe don't get as much from body language as somebody who's maybe neurotypical does. And I think that's a big part of it. So I think for some people they must feel like they're missing a big chunk of the presence of the person, and I find it very similar to being in person. And actually now in person I have to wear a mask because I had long COVID and I desperately don't want to get it again. And so I think actually when you meet with me online, you can see my face much better than when you meet with me in person. So I've got this extra barrier now of the mask when in person with people.
It's all data. That's how I think about it. It's all data. I really enjoy crunching data. It's just the kind of data I enjoy crunching is different to the kind of data that other people crunch. So I want to sort of talk a bit about sort of to go back to that kind of leadership stuff and managing teams in this context. Because we work in quite intense environments. So not only do we have to navigate all of these realities, but we have these kind of intense working conditions and quite high expectations. And scaling high performance teams in those environments requires like that really careful balance between urgency, like get it doneness, but also support, because we want to create the conditions in which great work happens, right? How do you ensure that your teams stay efficient without losing their sense of well-being and creativity, given the intensity and given what you know about yourself and how you've learned to operate in these environments?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of Dan Pink's Drive and the way he talks about motivation being sort of the sum of purpose, autonomy, and mastery. And there's a fantastic book. It's a little dated now, but called First Break All the Rules, which is the sort of Bible I found early on as a manager when I was just desperately wanting to not be a terrible manager, having had a couple of difficult ones, and desperate to find research to, I'm a nerd in the face of a problem. I try to find research and science to tell me what to do.
Facts.
Yeah, I would like some information and some facts, please. And First Break All the Rules has these 12 questions that predict high performance, and they fit quite neatly into purpose, autonomy, and mastery. But there's a few that don't, and those Camille Fournier refers to as community. I think I call it inclusion. So, it's somebody interested in your development and caring about you as a person and telling you when you do well, and those kinds of things, I think, are all about being able to be yourself and be successful. And so whenever I take on a team or an organization, I use that sort of set of 4 things to analyze where we are. So do we have great purpose? Does everybody know why we're doing what we're doing? Do people feel like they've got some autonomy? They get a say in what we do and how we do it? And then mastery. Do you have a sense that you're getting better at your specialism or even as a generalist? And then inclusion, can you be yourself and be successful here? And I think that's, it's broadly why, what, how, and who. But it's a very useful little mental checklist to go, are we in the right place on all of this? And different organizations have different gaps. Some places, they know exactly what the mission is and they're very proud of how they're working, but they don't feel like they get a say in what they do. Some places they've got everything except inclusion, and then some people do very, very well in that environment and some people don't, and you start to see it becoming very homogeneous because it's not possible for a wide range of people to be successful. And then, we know that all the data shows that homogeneous teams underperform. They are less innovative, they're less successful. And I think the reason for that's fascinating, because I don't think it's because diversity makes things easier. I think it's because it makes things harder. Having a set of people with really different perspectives and experiences and backgrounds, getting them to agree on the right way forward forces you to do two things. It forces you to collaborate, but it also forces you to rely on data more. And so I think that actually in the face of lots of different opinions, data becomes more important. And I personally think that's part of why diverse teams seem to, in the research, perform so much better and so much stronger, is because they're more reliant on data, more reliant on, examining reality, and then forced to figure out their differences, and to take those differences and make them a feature rather than a bug, is an undertaking. It's work, but it's so worthwhile.
It is, and I love the way that you're flipping the narrative that is often used against initiatives in this field, in the same way that people often talk about we don't want to apply diversity to recruitment processes in case it narrows the it reduces the pipeline. And my response is always no. Like the simple maths of it is that it will expand the pipeline. And I think if you can find ways to flip that narrative, it can become very, very powerful, because there is no real sensible answer back to that, unless you're going to refute maths. And no one's going to do that. How do you measure the success? So I was asking about efficiency. How do you measure the success of that approach, the purpose, autonomy, mastery? Because those are they could be construed to be fairly abstract terms. How have you taken them into the boardroom?
Like I mentioned, the set of 12 questions from First Break All the Rules is really helpful here. And so actually they have found their way into many engagement surveys now. So if you look at Peakon and similar, they've built a lot of the First Break All the Rules from Gallup's original study into the engagement surveys that are run. And so that's always one factor. The other thing I've increasingly started using with the board is DORA metrics, which are from Dr. Nicole Fosgren's work. She wrote a fantastic book with Jez Humble called Accelerate, which is all about efficiency in software development. And it's quite specific to software development, but software is notoriously difficult to measure because it's so ephemeral. And, we know that measuring lines of code is absolutely the wrong thing to do. It incentivizes all sorts of incorrect behaviors. And so the DORA metrics are things like cycle time. How long does it take from going from an idea to something that's in front of customers? Throughput, how many different pull requests are you doing? So how much work is going through the system? Time to review. So how long does work sit around waiting for somebody to look at it? And then things like time to recovery if there's an issue. And I think that if you can make those things better, then your efficiency is proven. And then it's really much more of a discussion of, are we pointing them at the right problems? And that's very much a partnership with product. So are we focused on the right metrics? Are we focused on the right things? Are we focused on impact rather than output as well? So let's talk about what we're doing for our customers, not the features that we're shipping. Let's talk about how that helps our customers. Kathy Sierra, who's sadly been sort of driven off the internet a couple of times by harassment, but she's an absolutely fantastic person to follow on these kind of topics. She wrote a brilliant book called Badass, which, her base premise is our job is not to build technology, it's to help people be more badass, help them be more brilliant at what they're doing. And if technology gets in the way of that, then we've failed. And if technology helps people to be better at the things that matter to them, whether that's work or home or family or community or charity or whatever, then we're succeeding. But it's about helping somebody have a capability that they wouldn't have had otherwise, or have more time that they wouldn't have had otherwise. It's not about feature number 127 that you shipped this quarter, right?
Yeah, I see that. And interesting. And obviously the purpose of this podcast is to kind of examine that edge between human and technology, and to acknowledge the role that humanness actually can bring into it. And I think it's that sort of enabling piece about technology that is super interesting in what you're saying, I think. At Pleo, you are leading a company that helps business manage spending more effectively. If we take that as a workplace as an example, how do you integrate human connection and empathy into the sort of tech-driven product and in a regulated environment as well, I imagine, whilst maintaining operational excellence? Like, that's quite a lot of elements to juggle. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, and I was very lucky at Pleo. So I had a fantastic chief product officer, and a woman called Meri. We were very much a tag team on that as a topic. So she and her product managers and her designers and user researchers really focused on talking to customers regularly and really understanding what made them tick. And that was everybody from folks we refer to as just spenders, average employee at the company who needed to have a card and needed to travel or buy stuff or whatever else, all the way up to the CFO. So one of the nicest bits of feedback we got was from a CFO who had come into multiple different companies as a sort of CFO fractional advisor and put Pleo in. And he went, they think that I can do magic because I brought them Pleo. And it was something that really built his credibility with these organizations, that he brought in something that was a more robust and better process, but it was also immensely user-friendly. And so it was a delight to use. And so we talked a lot about delightful experiences. We expected engineers to join user research sessions, or to at least read the summaries of those sessions. We had a close connect with our customer success and customer operations folks to make sure that any operational issues were being dealt with. And yeah, just, I suppose, generally just centered the customer in everything that we did. And even with topics like compliance and security, I think if you take a customer first approach to those as well, fundamentally we're handling people's money. They want it to be safe. Security and compliance shouldn't be an afterthought. It should be built into everything that you do. And I think that's part of explaining the why to people. I think often things like security and compliance are often an afterthought, or the bit of the process everybody hates because it's going to slow things down or be annoying or whatever. But we had a fantastic presentation just recently at LeadDev in Berlin, where somebody was saying, actually, we should be shifting left on compliance the same way that we have on operations and development and security. We should be moving compliance to be more automated, to be earlier in the process, to be part of our regular monitoring and alerting. We should be able to prove constant compliance by taking a much more automated approach to it. And that was a really interesting talk that we've just had at the beginning of November in Berlin.
That's so interesting. I love the implicit within what you're saying is that compliance is about responsibility, and responsibility for the customer, which I really like that. Actually, I think that's a helpful framing for people, and a human framing, actually, because in an ideal world, people don't set out to maliciously be uncompliant. It's often, let's hope, it's an accident, but actually, if you can reframe it as a personal responsibility, that is a very human way of looking at it. I also really like in what you're saying that the sort of customer focus. I want to go into a bit more on the internal customer, so your teams, because I think about people experience within an organization as a customer experience. It's a journey in the same way that the customer journey is. And one of the challenges that I think a lot of leaders in tech find in building a culture is where people feel valued in those sort of high performance settings. How do you foster a culture where things like vulnerability are embraced rather than seen as a weakness?
So I think that's down to role modeling. I think if you can be transparent and yourself in front of in front of a large organization and take difficult questions with grace, then that matters a lot. So I'm a little famous is maybe infamous. I'm not sure which. I was at Pleo. I would take anonymous Slido questions. So you didn't have to own up that it was you asking. You could be, frankly, as nasty as you wanted, and sometimes people were. But actually just being open to taking the anonymous, nasty, difficult, people didn't want it associated with their name question, and answering it honestly and from the heart really made a difference. And I think showed people that it didn't have to be negative to be transparent or to be yourself. And, there were times I didn't have great answers and I'd apologize for not having a great answer. And I think that was very real for people. But the other thing that Meta and I did at Pleo that worked really well, and I did this in the beginning of some other roles, but I didn't continue to do it until I went to Pleo, was we went around and met every team and sat with every team and asked them, what are you proud of? What are you worried about? What would you like us to be worried about? And if you had a magic wand, what would you do to fix things? And that was really informative. And doing that every year, because going around, 45 teams takes quite a while. It's quite a big endeavor. But going around, taking notes, noting the themes, and then it being very obvious that some of the plans for the coming time are generated from those conversations, and is a fast track to buy-in from people, because they know that they've been heard, because they can see it. They can see the gaps they talked about are on the roadmap now. They can see the ways of working problems that they've highlighted are being addressed, and that kind of stuff. And so I think there's a praxis of listening that really matters. And I think there's different ways to get that kind of input, right? So David Singleton, who was CTO at Stripe, he talks about doing engineerications, where he would basically take 2 weeks where he would block himself in his calendar as if he were on holiday. But what he would do is go and join a team for 2 weeks to get a real experience of what being an engineer on the ground felt like. And that helped him as CTO to be very aware of what was a bit sticky in the process, what was slowing people down, what was annoying, but not always, annoying enough that it was getting escalated all the time. That sort of low-level rumbling, discontented stuff is the stuff that is really toxic if not dealt with. And so I think it's as I say, there's multiple ways to get that kind of input, but making sure that you're really listening to your internal teams and that you're gathering as many of those signals as you can. And so I've been in a couple of organizations that never did exit interviews, and that's just ridiculous to me. Like, how wonderful is it for somebody to feel completely free to say exactly what they mean, hopefully in a respectful way, but the most truth you are going to get in an exit interview. And so to not do them, to not get that signal is a little crazy to me. I don't think it's sensible to miss out on such a key input.
No, I 100% agree. And I also, what I really like in what you're saying is that you systematized that. And so you repeated that approach at Pleo every year. You said you went. And I think that following through is what builds trust. Because actually do it once, people are like, oh, this is quite interesting. I'd love to talk to the CTO or whatever leadership team member is talking. But if you don't then follow through with actions and then follow through and meet them again, then it all feels a little artificial, doesn't it? That's very admirable, but it's quite hard on you, I would imagine. Having done similar things myself, I know how draining it can be. So I'd really like to sort of pivot a little bit to you on that vulnerability piece now, if I may, and to go a bit more personal, and hear you speak more about how you navigate those notions of strength, resilience, vulnerability, given that you have Ehlers-Danlos, you were relatively recently diagnosed as neurodivergent. And when we talked before, I mentioned Mustafa Suleyman's book, The Coming Wave, which talks about advancements in biotech, such that our bodies are increasingly replicable by technology, and simultaneous advancements in AI, such that our minds are too. I'm really interested in what that means to you as a neurodivergent human with disabilities who's also passionate about technology. Like, how do you square that circle?
I mean, I think it's fascinating. I did just read a study though about how somebody tried with AI to do proper digital twins to figure out how humans would act, and the AI versions were far too rational. They were not emotional enough, and they didn't predict consumer behavior effectively because they were not taking into account that, you know, people react differently based on whether they had their cup of coffee already, whether they are having a good day or not. You know, there's all these random factors that are not captured when you try to capture somebody's, you know, self-reported, you know, through surveys and those kind of things. And so
I'm
I think,
reminded,
yeah.
sorry, just to say, I'm reminded of when the shuffle first came out and people felt that it wasn't random enough. And so they had to unrandom it in
Yeah.
order to make it what people perceived to be random. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember that. It was amazing. I have very conflicting feelings about it because, on the one hand, as somebody with a disability, as somebody who's neurodivergent, these kinds of things don't tend to represent people like me very well. They don't tend to take into account folks who are, you know, not able to do everything physically or not able to work in exactly the same way and come up with the expected responses in the same way. So I've for a long time worried that things like personality testing and similar are unlikely to value people with neurodivergence as much as neurotypicals. And we know that almost all forms of standardized testing are, you know, negative for people of color and people from the global south and that kind of thing. So I'm on the one side, I think actually the human bias involved in many of the the designs of these things makes me worry about it. But equally, like for my physical challenge, for instance, some of the advances that are being made for people with much more severe disabilities, like you know, amputees and similar, who are now getting arms and legs that hook into your nervous system, so you can think what they should do and they will do it. That's fascinating. And like, if that gets to an exoskeleton at some point, that would be amazing for someone like me whose joints all dislocate, and those kind of things. Some of the gene therapy that's coming now is really fascinating as well. So Ehlers-Danlos is a genetic collagen defect. So it's not that my body doesn't produce enough, it's just that everything it produces is sort of structurally unsound. And so that makes all my skin and tendons and ligaments and organs and everything that's got collagen just a bit messed up. And so that's got a lot of different effects. But I think, you know, to go back to your original question about strength and resilience and vulnerability, I taken a very open approach to, you know, I don't hide my physical disability, I don't hide my neurodivergence, and I talk about it quite openly. I get actually quite a lot of, I think the people who appreciate that are quite vocal about it, and the people who think it's too much are quite quiet about it. So I possibly get weighted feedback, in that people who don't see themselves represented very often are very appreciative of it. But I do think that it's good to be real with people, and there are not enough people who are physically disabled, neurodivergent, who are different in leadership roles as well. And so I think I feel a big responsibility to be visible. I've a couple of times not taken CPTO roles because I think that people will assume I'm from product because they perceive me as a woman. And it's actually quite important for there to be very technical CTOs who are women, and it not to be seen as you can only be a you know, very senior manager if you're fully focused on the people side as a woman, which is sadly in tech one of the perceptions, is that if you're a senior leader and you're female, you're much more likely to be a very people focused leader and not a technical one. I think I benefited a lot in my early career from there being women more senior than me who were very visible, who were very open about what they had found challenging, and I really looked up to a set of women who had, to a great extent, had to take on male attributes in order to be successful. You know, I think about the women who really succeeded. Many of them had stay-at-home husbands. Many of them had not aggressive communication style, but certainly very direct communication style. And they had to become like men in some ways in order to succeed. And then my generation was sort of going, well, we're very proud of you and we think it's amazing what you did, but we quite like there to be a version of this where we could be ourselves and be successful, please. And actually at P&G, I at one point was very worried. I got sort of held up a lot as a woman who was succeeding, and did a sort of 20-year career in 10 years. And I also had a wife and wore, quite masculine clothes, but that's who I am. I wasn't trying to pretend to be something I'm not. But I worried that I wasn't a great role model for somebody who was very femme, or for somebody in a different situation at home than me. And I actually thought it was a problem at one point. I was like, well, if everybody else on the leadership team is a guy, and then the only woman you've got is the one who's got a wife and wears guys' clothes, and that's not really diversity, is it? It's like this is, and particularly because there's a certain type of straight white guy who, because they can talk to me about sports, thinks of me as one of the boys, and that's a little toxic too. So it was always something I was a little unsure about when I was the only one, and so I was so happy when there was a broader range of women who were promoted and who did very well. It was very inspiring to see.
Yeah, I love that, and obviously I have similar, some of that what you say really touches my experience as well. So I hear you, and I really, one of the books I'm just looking is on my shelf, Fortitude by Bruce Daisley. He's very, very strong on this idea that resilience is a team sport, not an individual trait. And on what you're talking about, I think, is finding your community in a variety of different ways, whether that's being one of the boys sometimes, or, other women role models, or whatever that community looks like for you. It doesn't have to be and it doesn't even have to be one community. You can fit into multiple communities, right? Because we all contain multitudes, and that's it's lovely to have that freedom, as you say. And generationally, I think we do have more freedom. That's the difference between us and our mothers, for example. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I think
it's one of the things that I find the most wonderful about LeadDev is that it's become this community of engineering leaders who want to do right by people, and that's been such a strong theme and such a strong part of who we are. And we were, Ruth, who's the CEO and the founder of LeadDev, and she met me at a talk I was doing about diversity and inclusion. It was called Practical Diversity, and came up to me afterwards and said, hey, I might be, eventually that turned into me chairing the conference. And she was very resolute that from the beginning, this was LeadDev's 10 years old now, so it was absolutely in the middle of the maelstrom of there being a load of tech conferences where there was a token woman or a token person of color, and everybody else was a straight white guy. And there's nothing wrong with being a straight white guy. Some of my very best friends are straight white guys, but it's not very representative of the industry, and not very representative where we want the industry to go.
Or our customers.
Or our customers, absolutely. And so from the very beginning, we said, okay, we're going to make sure there's always as many women on stage as men. We're going to be aware of how much airtime they get, because one thing that's been quite fascinating in our call for proposals is we've got two time formats. There's a 10-minute and 25-minute talk, and women and people from underrepresented groups are wildly more accommodating. So they're much more likely to say, well, I could do this as a 10 or a 25. I'll flex to what you need. And the more sort of dominant demographic tends to just be like, no, I need a full 25 minutes, of course. And so we've had to be careful that we don't end up with, equal number of women and men speaking, but the women having much less airtime than the men because of that, and so on. But we've really done a lot of work to make the top of the funnel really diverse, and to make the experience of speakers very inclusive. And that combination has worked really well. So we now get more than 50% of the applications to speak come from people from underrepresented backgrounds, and that makes it very easy for the bottom of the funnel of who we select to be very representative. My favorite moment that I've had in 10 years at LeadDev was when we were planning a New York conference, and we tried to sort of represent the demographics of wherever we're running the conference, rather than just always having a very London-centric view of it. And so we had an argument about whether the mainland Spanish speakers that we were going to have, they were technically Hispanic, but did they really count as Hispanic representation for the sort of Latinx community that's a very significant percentage of people in the US? And I was like, this is not a very typical conference diversity conversation to be having of like, do our international Spanish speakers count, or are they not really, going to be seen as representation for Latinx people in the audience? And I was just like, this is the argument to be having. This is the kind of thing that matters, right?
Yeah, exactly. What a gift. And so what have you learned from the work on LeadDev about the extent to which we value, or maybe don't sufficiently value, human skills in our workplaces? You told me a story previously about people not asking about paying for tickets.
Yeah, so Ruth in her early research, so she did proper user research when starting the conference, and she put together all of these lineups of real talks that existed from real people and kind of showed them to people and said, would you be excited to see this? Would you attend? Would you? And the final question was, would you pay for a ticket or ask your boss to pay for a ticket for you? And when it was fully soft skills focused, people loved the lineup, but wouldn't ask for the right to attend it. And when it was a mix of technology and people stuff, then they felt comfortable asking, because it's very accepted in tech that tech changes all the time. And so you have to spend some effort and some time to keep up with what's changing. But there's this deeply held belief with a lot of people that people skills are just something that you have or don't have. And I call it the soft skills fairy. We act like there's a soft skills fairy and you're tapped with a wand at birth and that's it for the rest of your life. When like, if anybody is proof that that is bullshit, it's me, right? I'm autistic. I'm not good at people. I have no natural capability in that area. And there are still people who are absolutely flawed and shocked by finding out that I'm autistic, because their perception is I've led a number of large organizations. I'm not seen as somebody who's, cold or, any of those things that are sort of associated with autism. And so I think I'm absolutely proof that you can learn anything, including EQ. And that's, the science supports that as well. EQ is much more modifiable than IQ. And we're much better at building soft skills and empathy and understanding and people skills than we can change that about ourselves much more easily than we can change sort of our base intelligence from an intellectual point of view. I think LeadDev taught us that people don't want to admit they need help on the thing they need the most help on, which is the people skills, because we also have a challenge in tech in particular, which is it's not unknown in other industries, but I think it's particularly severe in tech, that the work that gets you to be a senior engineer and to be great at your job doesn't teach you jack shit about management. And so when you become a manager for the first time in tech, it's a career change. It's not a progression or a promotion. It is a whole new thing that you are a novice at when you started at it. And it's very difficult. Like, you can have developed coaching and mentoring skills on the engineering path, but very little of the rest of the management toolkit is taught to you. And there's a problem that we tend to promote people who are technically strong and then give them a job that's all about people and then hope that it'll be okay. And so I think LeadDev has grown into a place where people can be a little bit vulnerable and admit that they didn't know how to do something, and talk about how they overcame challenges and how they what it was like to be a manager for the first time, or a tech lead for the first time, or a CTO for the first time. And I think those are some of the best talks we've had, where people come and share that real lived experience of what it was like, and what was difficult and what wasn't, and what helped from the past and what they had to unlearn from what they had learnt. I joke sometimes that I went into computing because computers do exactly what you tell them to do. Whether it's what you want them to do is a separate question, but they're very obedient. And then I ended up working with people because they were harder. And I'm chasing the challenge at all times.
Yes, people are harder. I've been a chief people officer for over 10 years now, and it's when people are trying to be nice to me, they say, "Oh, it's the hardest job on the leadership team," and it's like, well, it's not really a competition, but I do appreciate the acknowledgement that it's certainly not the easiest job. So I get it. And so, as someone who coaches and trains future leaders, what are the most important human skills that technologists should develop to be successful in this increasingly automated AI world?
I mean, I think the first thing is actually motivation. I run a course called Be a Brilliant People Developer, and one of the successes for me of that workshop, of that course, is that some people do it and come out at the end resolute that they should not be a manager. And that is one of the things that I view as a success of that workshop, is for people who don't want to put effort into caring about other people to realize that that precludes them from being good managers, that they need to give a shit about other people.
Yeah.
And if they are not
Wow.
gonna, which sounds so basic to somebody
Yeah.
like you, I know, but remember the audience I've got. And I think that, and that's something I say at the beginning of the workshop, is I can teach you everything and I believe that you can learn everything, but I can't teach you to care. And so if you fundamentally don't give a shit about other people or the people in your team or the success of somebody else's career, don't do this job. If you do care, and what you need is the skills on how to listen well, how to coach well, how to mentor, how to know when you're not the right mentor, when it should be somebody else, how to give and receive feedback, how to have difficult conversations, how to do career coaching. All of these other things are teachable and learnable, but that base desire to look after other humans, I think, is something that you either nurture in yourself or you don't. I don't think it's something that you're like born with and then it's always there or not there. But I do think that there are some people who just go, yeah, you know what? I don't want to wake up in the morning and have a bunch of other people's internal workings dictate how my day goes. And I would like a more controllable day than that. And that's fine. There's a lot of more controllable days you can have if you work mostly with code or mostly with spreadsheets or mostly with, these kind of options. There are other jobs that are also available. And I think that's one of the really positive things that I do credit LeadDev having some impact on, is we've seen the dual career path become very mainstream. And we talk a lot about that at LeadDev, and we have over the years, that forcing people to go into management, if management's the only way up, it's going to result in poor managers and poor experiences for employees. And a great manager should be a multiplier. They should be somebody who helps, 8 to 12 people be all that they can be, the best that they can be. And I don't think it's a failing of the individual that they could benefit from a great manager. And I think that actually having 8 to 12 people be brilliant rather than average is massively, massively valuable. But I think you have to have good managers to get those impacts. And so I think a lot of people, we're in another cycle of people thinking that we don't need middle managers and we should just flatten all of the orgs. And what always happens will happen again, which is a load of ICs will get very frustrated that they're not progressing in their careers because they need a manager to help them understand and figure out what they want, and then figure out how to get it, and then actually do it. And I don't think that that's a failing of the ICs. I think it's a benefit that great managers can provide, but it means that we have to be producing great managers. We can't settle for mediocre when it comes to management. And so,
And they have to be caring. That I really like that. I have something for you. I read a book by a guy called Henry Marsh a few years ago, called Do No Harm, and he's a neurosurgeon and ended up teaching neurosurgeons. And one of the bits that really struck me from the book was, he said, I realized after a while that I don't need surgeons that can be deeply empathetic, because actually you don't need a deeply empathetic surgeon. You don't need someone sobbing at your bedside because of the pain that you're in. What you can swap empathy for, though, is compassion. But what I cannot train people to do is to care about the quality of their work, about the people that are around them. And it's exactly the same for people work. People don't need a hug when you're delivering hard messages. They need you to be clear and understanding and, thoughtful and intentional in how you're communicating with them, but they don't need a hug. But you do need to care. Like, you can't drop the ball.
you can't center yourself, which is what a lot of people default to doing when
100%.
giving bad news, is that they make it all about how difficult it is for them to make this bad or difficult decision, and how, I have a personal bugbear about CEOs crying when they give tough news, because I'm just like, you're the one with the most control in this situation, and you're trying to make it everybody else's problem. It's not cool.
100%. So I think one of the things that we've talked a bit about is this sort of humanness within a kind of technological environment, and often what happens when you do that is humanness is positioned in opposition to technology somehow, or versus technology. And I'd love to know your thoughts on how leaders in tech can avoid falling into that trap and instead really embrace the idea of humans and technology working symbiotically. And if you could share maybe an example of how that I think you agree with me, assuming you do, uh, about how that might work in practice.
I think it's a really interesting area because I 100% agree. I think that what we should be using tech for is to augment humans, and to make the work more interesting, the work more creative, to make it less laborious and dull and, repetitive and annoying for people to do. Whether that's, in your school life, your home life, your work life, whether your customers are internal or external, understanding what they're trying to achieve and then helping them to do it really well. I think, Matt, that's one of my bugbears with AI at the moment, is we've got a lot of AI for AI's sake at the moment, and there's a lot of companies who are just sort of their product strategy is slap some LLMs on top and see what happens, and I just don't think that's going to lead to very much good in the world. It's just going to burn a load of forests and not much else. I did say to somebody the other day that we're getting to the point where you write a bunch of bullet points and then AI expands it into an email, and then on the other side AI condenses it into bullet points again, and then somebody reads bullet points. And I was just like, can't we just exchange bullet points with each other and skip the rainforest dying in the middle? And my friend who I said it to did go, well, that's the most autistic thing you've ever said. So I was like, okay, fair enough. I understand that maybe not everybody just wants the
condensed version
changing. But there are times when I do worry about the things that we're building, because just because you can doesn't mean you should, is an adage that I think deserves more airtime in tech rather than less. I think we are overwhelmingly focused on what's possible rather than what's sensible, and I get that some innovation comes out of strange places, and to some extent you want to give people powerful tools and see what they do with them. And one of the most fascinating things actually for tech companies is to see the weird and wonderful and interesting things that people do with your products, given half a chance. So I think some of it is just about centering the human in everything that we do, and thinking about what is the right thing to do as well as what is the possible thing to do. And I appreciate that makes me sound like a philosopher, but I think tech could do with a bit more philosophy, very bluntly. We're increasingly in a world where critical thinking matters much more, where paying attention to the source of facts matters a lot more, and we've got to get better at this stuff, because if we keep along the route that we're on, we're just going to end up creating a few more billionaires or trillionaires that then are outweighed massively by people starving in countries that are not benefiting from the latest wave of tech. Like, late stage capitalism is a nightmare. And I think we don't quite know how to fight against it at the moment. It's one of the challenges. And sorry, getting a little political.
No, but I think it's interesting. I think because I think one of the ways in which humans differentiate themselves still is by applying critical thought, judgment, and taste. And that's one of the things that you're talking about. One of the skills that you're talking about applying. It seems to me, I was making notes whilst you were talking, that there are to help leaders navigate that human versus technology sort of thing, and shift towards the kind of symbiotic approach. Maybe it's about asking them questions. Has judgment and taste been applied in this? Is critical thinking a component of your working practice, of your strategy, of how your team is building this product? Has the human been centered in it? Should we do this rather than can we do it? Let's take away the kind of technical competence. Let's assume technical competence, but ask the kind of principle question, the moral question, and I love that sort of possible and sensible. I think, and it really could be summarized, I suppose, as navigating those grey areas rather than the binary, essentially. Rapid fire questions. What's one thing you'd like to see banished from workplace culture once and for all?
Presenteeism.
Love it. Agree. If you could introduce a new, seemingly impossible culture into every workplace, what would it look like? I don't know if you can do that in rapid fire.
I think openness and vulnerability. Like, I think people really feeling like they can be themselves. I think we have to do that with psychological safety. So widespread psychological safety and people feeling able to be who they really are at work would be something. Now, who they want to be at work. Like, I don't think anybody should be forced to bring their whole selves if they don't want to. But making it possible for people to not spend energy and time pretending to be something they're not. Because as somebody who spent most of their life masking, I can tell you how much energy goes into it. And that energy is much better spent on the work than on pretending to be something that you're not.
100%. And despite the fact that we've decided to ignore the binary or counter the binary and what we were just saying, running a tech team, which is more important, empathy or deep tech skills? And feel free to challenge the premise.
Empathy.
Empathy.
And I think one of the realities is the best engineers I know with the deepest tech skills are also very empathetic. Because what makes them the best is their ability to understand what the customer needs, what the user is going to be thinking or doing or needing at the point of using the software. And that is what makes them brilliant, is that they're so good at empathizing and understanding and then using their deep technical ability to make that happen.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you did challenge the premise there, because I think there is a false premise within that question. What's your secret weapon for keeping team morale high?
I think if you are all aligned behind a mission that you all genuinely think is worthwhile, that's kryptonite to demotivation.
Yeah, meaning is people. That's what people look for. What's one human skill you'd bet will still be in high demand 50 years from now, no matter how advanced tech gets?
Caring. Like, I think that every move we've made towards computers doing more of the looking after people, the worse things have become.
Yeah. That caring is I love that. Okay, so I'm going to ask a couple of closing questions now. Technology is obviously going to continue to evolve. It's probably why we both work in tech, really, is that thriving in that change environment. What do you think is the most important trait for leaders to cultivate in that context in order to maintain that human first approach while scaling?
Curiosity. I think it's very easy for us to lose our curiosity when we get bogged down in what needs to get done and why and everything. And we lose track of just going, what problem is being solved here? What's the issue? What's somebody trying to achieve? And I think, curating curiosity and giving teams the space and time to use that curiosity. It's very hard to be curious when you're worked off your feet.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I think the number of times people come to me and they say, I've got a problem. And I say, have you asked why? And they're like, no. Okay, go and ask why, and then come back to me, and then we'll talk about the actual problem rather than the observed problem. So I think that curiosity is critical. And then the question I'm going to ask everybody, what's one thing you wouldn't ever automate?
It's a nerdy people management answer, but calibration. So that the process of assessing people and talking about them and talking about their potential and their performance. And I think there's so much value. It can be very time consuming. You know, I tend to lead hundreds of engineers and I like to do calibration across the entire set. And because I don't want there to be a perception that it's easier to get promoted in one area than another or under one manager than another. And I just think so much good comes out of really strong calibration that I want that to continue to be a very, very human-led and human-focused process.
Yeah, I love that. It goes back to that idea of care, but also judgment and taste, doesn't it? Which is what humans bring to the process. Machines can analyze the data for you, but deciding what you then do about it is a human.
There's also this thing called I think it's called the calculator bias or the calculator effect, where we got so used to calculators being always right, we assume computers are always right. And so that we don't apply the same level of bias detection on things that are automated or things that are done by computer, even by AI, and that we do on things done by humans. And so I think for us to be healthily skeptical and to be on the watch out for bias, particularly when managing and leading people, is so important. I don't want to leave that to computers.
Despite loving technology and being a lifelong technologist, I can't think of a better way really to end this than on that. Thank you so much for your thoughtful and very open answers to my questions. I really very much appreciate your time, and thank you.
Oh, this was lovely. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay. The Future is Human is brought to you by Muse, the cloud-based hospitality platform. If you want to learn more about what we do, visit muse.com. And if you'd like to listen to more conversations like this one, find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. Subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Thanks for listening.